So coming up this weekend is going to be a big weekend of MMA, and it does start with the PFL with this event on Friday at 11:30 a.m. in the morning because it is taking place in Dubai. We do have the first PFL event under the new CEO, if I'm not mistaken, and in my opinion, if you haven't really been a fan of the PFL in the past because you don't like their tournaments, you think they've been gimmicky, this and that, I've got good news for you. I'm pretty sure they're throwing the tournament system in the bin. So now is a really good time to get into the PFL because these two fights at the top of the card are for the vacant PFL titles. And I do believe we're not going to be getting those $1 million tournaments anymore. They were confusing. They were confusing for me, someone that has been watching those tournaments for a long time since Emiliano Sordi won the title in 2019, I think it was. And they were confusing me. So I can only imagine they were confusing the average viewer as well. Now, to confuse you, I'm actually not 100% sure where you can legally watch this. PFL does have a deal with ESPN, but I have a feeling this card is actually going to be taking place on DAZN. So I would kind of check out your DAZN or ESPN Plus subscription to see if that's where it's going to be broadcast, because personally, I'm sorry, I can't really tell you. But of course, I will be doing this video on the We Want Picks channel, and I will also be writing an article about this card on the We Want Picks website. Use my code ARTEM for 10% off your first membership. Now, I'm going to kind of talk about something now that is only really makes sense if you already have a channel. So just check the timestamps if you wanted to skip. But the YouTube has added a pretty new feature, a collaboration feature. You would have seen my Contender Series video with We Want Picks. One of them, because I do record two separate videos, was with We Want Picks in collaboration, and it's on my channel. If you wanted to do that with me, I am very open to doing collaborations with other MMA channels. I don't have like a minimum subscriber count or anything that you need to have. Like, I'm not a gatekeeper in that sort of way. I do just kind of have one sort of clause, I guess you could say. It's just that I want to have seen that you have been doing YouTube for a little bit of time. I have many times people reach out to me asking for a collab, and then I look at their channel and they have no videos, or they have one video, and it's like, you know, come back to me in a couple of months once you've done like 10, 12, 15 videos, you know, something like that. So yeah, if you wanted to collaborate with me, the only thing is you just have to deal with my time zone being in New Zealand, and also my horrific time management as well. But hey, let me know if you're keen on that. Now let's get into the first fight of the night. We have Jarrah Al-Silawi taking on Gregory Babene. And I'm not even kidding when I say this. I think that Jarrah Hussein Al-Silawi has a lot of skill, and I think he is the much more skilled fighter out of the two. Now, you would say Gregory Babene is nearly 42 years old, and yes, he is. And I am very familiar with Gregory Babene, probably too familiar, to be honest with you. But I do think that he does hit hard enough to knock out Jarrah Hussein Al-Silawi, because he does not have a chin. He really doesn't, man. And despite him actually having really good skills and coming into the PFL in 2022 and finding a decent amount of success, ever since he got knocked out by Umalatov, and then he just kind of kept getting knocked out over and over again, this guy's chin is terrifying to me. I think even when he fought this fat short guy, he even got rocked at one point. Like, this is not a good chin, and Babene, he does hit hard enough. Now, is he the more skilled fighter in the matchup? Absolutely not. I think Al-Silawi is the better kickboxer, but I just cannot trust that chin at all. I'm going to be picking Babene. He is a slight -140 favorite. Very low confidence. I'm picking a 42-year-old man. Now we can move up to Makkasharip Zaynukov, also known as Artur Zaynukov, as he does fight against John Mitchell. I do think that Zaynukov does win this fight. I will be honest with you, I do not find entertainment in Zaynukov's fights. He really is that stereotypical wrestling, takedown, grind out a decision sort of fighter. Aside from an injury, the last time he got a finish was in 2019. I don't think he gets a finish against John Mitchell in this matchup. Now, John Mitchell's interesting because he has been active, but over a course of different sports. You know, he did fight in 2025 in MMA, and then he fought a couple of times back-to-back in boxing, which is cool. But after I saw you get out wrestled and finished on the ground by Jakub Kasuba, I don't love seeing the fact that you've gone and now are boxing. If he was taking on a striker, that would be a plus, but he's not. He's taking on a very boring wrestler that is just going to try and take him down and grind him out for 15 minutes. And honestly, I think that Zaynukov can do it. I don't find entertainment in Zaynukov's style, but he's minus 300, and I do think he does win. Now we have Takeshi Izumi as he does fight against Vinicius Cenci. This is like a really weird matchup because Cenci, of course, is just a very interesting fighter to me. He was called up on the Contender Series out of genuinely nowhere, and then he lost to Sam Patterson after finding a decent amount of success on the feet, actually, in the first round. Then just disappeared off the face of the earth, won a fight on UAE Warriors, and now he's been fighting against the former Bellator world champion, Brent Primus, and he's in the PFL. So, I don't know who Cenci's manager is, but he's got a good one. And I do think he does beat Izumi. Izumi has 6 wins, 6 decision wins, doesn't really find finishes, does wrestle offensively, but here's the problem. He's going to put himself in a submission by doing that, because if Cenci's good at one thing, it's BJJ. And to give Cenci a little bit more credit, his boxing is pretty good, and I think he's the better striker than Izumi. He's bigger than Izumi. I just think that he's going to beat Izumi by finish, either if it's knockout or by submission, so I think that Cenci does win this fight. Now we have a very intriguing fight in, I guess, outside of the rankings of the PFL, now that they've really kind of established something. Luann Sardinha, as he does take on Mirafzal Akhtamov. Akhtamov's going to try and take his head off in the first round, but he's probably going to gas himself out doing that. And Sardinha has proven that he can push a pretty hard pace in the second and the third round. He has been very inactive throughout his career, but he's coming off a second round finish. I think he's coming off a second round finish as well against a 14-0 guy with a padded record in 2020. He went the distance against Marcelo Marquez, who is kind of proving himself to be a pretty good fighter. And I think that we can see Sardinha go out there, survive the onslaught that is just going to be the first round of Akhtamov, trying to take him down, trying to knock him out on the feet, and really kind of putting it on him with his own sort of Muay Thai style after the first round. So if Akhtamov knocks him out or finishes him in the first round, I wouldn't be too surprised, but I do think Sardinha is good enough to survive and take over. He's only minus 150 as a favorite in this fight. I think that Sardinha could be someone to look out for at this lightweight division in the PFL. Omar Dafrawy is the champion of PFL MENA, which is like the PFL's Middle East sort of sector. And he's looked pretty good. I think he's got to be taller than 5'9", because I have described his style, and this isn't something that I just made up. I described his style before he even made his PFL debut. He is the Egyptian Carlos Prates. I'm not even kidding, man. This guy fights with his hands pretty low, and he's got a really sort of rangy striking style, despite being listed at 5'9". Once again, I think he's got to be a little bit taller than that. He's knocked out our boy Jarrah Hussein Al-Silawi, who's fighting earlier on in the card. He became a champion after beating the 7-0 Al-Akra, and he's even got a submission win in his last fight as well. I think that was a rematch too. But I think that we are going to see a very intriguing sort of style of matchups, because once again, just like the previous fights, Zindeli is a guy that's going to go out there and just try and take his head off in the first round. He's going to be shooting takedowns early. He's going to be throwing massive shots, trying to knock him out in the first round. And Zindeli just beat Jack Grant. And Jack Grant's really good. I know that he did lose a couple fights recently, but one of them was a split decision to the Lazy King. Then he got a 40-second slam KO in his fight following that. I think that this is an intriguing matchup between two guys that do have KO power, between two guys that do have an interesting skill set. I think that Dafrawy has the better cardio out of the two. He just needs to avoid getting finished early on in the matchup, but I think he can do that as a minus 185 favorite. I'm picking Dafrawy to win by KO. This is the single most intriguing fight on the card that isn't the main event, in my opinion. Pouya Rahmani is taking on Slim Trabelsi. These are two legitimate heavyweight prospects. You don't really see heavyweight prospects against each other that often, and these two are legitimate prospects. Rahmani has been finding a lot of success in the world of grappling. He's been beating good guys in grappling, including Slim Trabelsi himself. And also, Kaynan Duarte, I think, has gone on to actually be like a pretty good grappler. Like, this is a legitimate guy, maybe a world champion. He beat Craig Jones in 2022. I think Denzel Freeman's a pretty good wrestler in MMA. And he's also beaten Hamdi Abdelwahab, who was a Olympian in grappling. So Rahmani's the real deal, man, and the odds do reflect that because he is minus 370. However, I don't think that I can pick him as a minus 370 favorite, and I know that I say this, I never pick my fights based on odds, but I feel like this is a fight I can make an exception for, because I just do not believe in the line that much. If you do watch Rahmani's MMA fights, I know that he's finishing these guys in the first round without really any problem, and maybe he does do that to Trabelsi and just makes me look like an idiot. I'm pretty aware of that potential, but he doesn't strike at all. He's just kind of diving for takedowns over and over again until he eventually gets them, and then eventually gets the sub. I worry about the cardio in MMA. These are 5-minute rounds, you know, and Trabelsi is a very talented fighter. I think he can survive the first round against Rahmani, and I think that we can see Trabelsi maybe take over in the second and the third round. And the thing about Trabelsi is he has not had a perfect run in 8-0. He was getting beaten up by Azamat Nurtalayev until he wasn't anymore. You know, he showed that he can survive. I think he robbed Babene. I think that's a bit of a hot take, but I don't think he beat Babene. But the thing is, I think he can survive against Rahmani in the first round and then go on to beat Rahmani based on the second and the third round. But once again, it really is a situation where if Rahmani gets a first round sub, I'm not gonna be that shocked, but as a plus 300 underdog, I think there's value on Trabelsi, and I am picking Trabelsi kind of based on those odds. I know that's not something I ever really do at all, but this is just a fight I'm gonna make the exception for. So very low confidence Trabelsi pick. Jack Cartwright fights Callan Loughran on short notice. I think that this is a good signing for the PFL. Jack Cartwright, of course, I believe it was for Octagon. Yes, he fought 3 times for Octagon. Was probably on the verge of getting a title shot for that promotion, and then the PFL have snatched him up on short notice now to fight against Callan Loughran, who was in the UFC. So I think that both of these guys probably could make a name for themselves now under the PFL banner, especially Callan Loughran, just because he is like a pretty marketable sort of guy. And I do think that we are going to see Loughran kind of just out-muscle Jack Cartwright in this matchup. Cartwright's a grappler, but I don't think he has like the strength required to get the takedowns over Loughran, and I don't think that he's just going to be able to just control Loughran, really. You know, like Loughran's striking's pretty bad. We've seen that in the UFC exposed, especially by Jake Hadley. But Jake Cartwright's striking also isn't all that impressive, so I think that this is going to be a fight which is going to be dictated by the wrestling, in which I think that Loughran is the bigger, better wrestler. So I'm going to be picking Loughran to win. This is a very short notice fight, and minus 450 on Loughran. Wow, okay, I didn't expect the odds to be that wide, but I do think Loughran wins the matchup. Archie Colgan takes on JJ Wilson. I do like JJ Wilson a lot, but I also like Archie Colgan a lot. Both of these guys are really good, and now that we're so high up on the main card, and this is the main event here for the lightweight championship, I truly believe this is a title eliminator. So I think the winner of this fight is then going to get the title shot in the PFL against the winner of this main event here. Archie Colgan's good, man. He's a really good boxer wrestler. We even saw, I think it was his most recent fight against Banawi, that we saw him had to deal with a lot of grappling situations, offensively and defensively. And we even saw a lot of boxing out of him when he did take on Justin Montalvo. And I know that every single time I have broken down Archie Colgan, I bring up this fight, and I'm sure it's getting old for you guys, but he outboxed the boxer in that fight. He beat Manuel Souza as well, who just went on to have a really good run in Dana White's Contender Series. Now, I think some people think that Souza could have potentially won that matchup because he did spend the third round just running forward after Colgan, but no matter what, that's a good win to have. The Barnawi win's a good win to have as well. We displayed a lot of offensive grappling, defensive grappling too, and we've seen that he does have the hands as well. JJ Wilson's also a very interesting prospect. He's a guy that has fought at 145 pounds before, was too big for the weight class, moved up to 155, and then he beat Vladimir Tokov in one of the more interesting decisions I think you might ever see, because Vladimir Tokov spends nearly the entire fight on top of JJ Wilson, And JJ Wilson actually won this fight on bottom position with elbows and submission attempts. A very intriguing matchup. Now, it's not super entertaining, so I can't just say, oh, I recommend you go watch it. But if you're really curious about seeing a fight won in bottom position, which doesn't happen often, that is an example of it happening there. And then, since then, he moved over to PFL, looked amazing against Mads Burnell, just put on a dominant display. Even out-grappled Mansur Barnawi as well in his matchup, if you wanted to draw comparisons to Colgan too. But I do think the problem with JJ Wilson is his takedown defense. It's not incredible. And once he does get taken down, because his BJJ is so good off of his back, he's very content with being held down. And Colgan's very content with being in top position. So I do think that Colgan does win this fight. And I think the winner of this fight does go on to become the challenger of the next title fight, which is going to be, in my opinion, Colgan and a minus 310 favorite. Now we have Magomedov fighting against Sergio Pettis. I think the odds for this one should be close, and if they're not, they're not close. Magomedov is minus 250. Okay, I'm picking Magomedov, but once again, there's value on the dog in Pettis, in my opinion, because he just beat Raufeon Stots, who is a similar stylistic matchup to Magomedov. And I'll also put this out there. I do recommend that you watch Magomedov versus Patchy Mix if you wanted to do tape study for Mix versus Wicklax and for this fight as well. Because in this fight, Magomedov lets Patchy Mix get away. I just pulled my microphone cord, sorry. Get away with his really awkward standstill style. And he just never really punishes Mix's very poor striking defense. So on the feet, I do think that we are going to see Pettis, we will see Pettis find success. That's not a might, that's a will. And then, I think he just lost to Savage Nurmagomedov, by the way. I picked Savage Nurmagomedov to win that fight. I feel a little bit robbed, I'll be honest. But hey, that was a close fight. It really could have gone either way. I personally actually did think Nurmagomedov won, but you know, that is what it is. Magomedov was able to out-wrestle him in a lot of moments and was the much bigger fighter in that matchup. And I think he's going to be the bigger fighter in this matchup. And the reason why I do lean with the Magomedov side is just based on the Pettis performances against Kyoji Horiguchi. And I know he beat Kyoji Horiguchi, but he was not winning this fight until he got the spinning back fist in the 4th round. And then against Kyoji Horiguchi, he just got out-wrestled the entire time. And this was a really good performance for Kyoji Horiguchi, who's now been signed to the UFC. And, like, this could age well, but I am going to put this out there. I think that Kyoji Horiguchi does present a genuine tough matchup for Alexandre Pantoja, because he's not going to be scared to grapple with Alexandre Pantoja. But anyway, that's definitely for another day. He's going to have to win a few in the UFC first. But I do think that Magomedov can out-wrestle Sergio Pettis, and I think he does win a decision based on that wrestling. Now we can move up to the co-main event. This is the light heavyweight title fight between Corey Anderson, former UFC fighter Corey Anderson, and Dovlet's son Yagshimuradov, who is the PFL champion after he knocked out Impa Kasanganay in less than a minute. And Dovlet's son Yagshimuradov is not a fighter you want to stand and trade with. This is a guy which got the respect of Jakub Nero very early on. And Nero, you could tell watching that fight, because Nero's a one-punch first-round KO artist himself. Yagshimuradov hit Nero hard early on, and Nero did not want anything to do with that matchup anymore, and kind of almost gave up on himself and got knocked out in the first round. After that, he beat Wilkinson. A little bit of wrestling in this matchup, mostly from the Wilkinson side. Byong is like a freak athlete, but he just doesn't really quite have the MMA skills to kind of put it all together. And then he, of course, knocked out Kasanganay, who also has been knocked out since, but still, very good performance. Impa Kasanganay, I don't know what he was doing in that fight. This is cope, because I did pick Kasanganay to win. He was walking into the pocket with his hands by his waist. I've never seen someone beg to get knocked out more than Kasanganay in that fight. And this is a rematch in which in 2021, which is, 4 years ago, pretty long time ago, Corey Anderson did dominate this matchup with his offensive wrestling, and he has not been an active little boy, has he? Because he has only fought 5 times since 2021, He did fight and beat Denis Goltsov in what was at heavyweight, which is a really good win to have because Goltsov's a scary boy himself with a lot of power. And he did beat Carl Moore, but, Carl Moore's... Yeah. Yeah, on that one, to be honest. I do think that we're going to see Corey Anderson go out there and just kind of do what Corey Anderson does. Against Vadim Nemkov, he was out wrestling Vadim Nemkov in that matchup, and he lost the rematch. And then I think he can do the same against Dovlet, Yagshimuradov. Hopefully that breakdown makes any sense at all. That was all over the place. I'm picking Corey Anderson. He's a minus 200 favorite. Now it's the main event. This is a fight which I think a lot of people are interested in. People have been messaging me about this on Instagram. People have been commenting on my YouTube channel about this as well. And the truth is, guys, I just think that the same thing happens again. I think that Usman Nurmagomedov is going to win this fight. I think he is going to win this fight by decision. Now, that very heavily discredits the performance of Paul Hughes in that matchup entirely. Because Paul Hughes, he really kind of went above and beyond my personal expectations for this fight. I did not think that he was going to make it so close against Usman Nurmagomedov. Because Usman started that fight very well, and then Paul Hughes really started to take over, and it ended up being a very close decision. I wouldn't say a controversial decision, but a performance that was so impressive, it did demand the rematch that we are finally getting. And I do think that we are going to see an improved Usman Nurmagomedov. Now, this is definitely not really based on anything truthful, but I do think there is a chance that maybe Usman Nurmagomedov did underestimate Paul Hughes just a little bit going into this matchup, because he did really let himself slip in moments on the feet. He wasn't pressuring as much as he was. He wasn't even really striking as much as he was. And you really could credit that just to how good and how hard Paul Hughes does hits, because Paul Hughes is a legitimate striker. Probably is the #1 biggest fumble the UFC ever made. I know that you could say maybe the fumble was Edward Vartanyan, but I think that Paul Hughes is probably the biggest fumble that the UFC made, because they just didn't sign him, man. Like, I don't really know why they didn't do that. And I think there's even other examples as well of the UFC just not really signing these clearly elite fighters, and then they just get picked up by, like, ACA. And once a fighter signs with ACA, they're never leaving that promotion, man. Like, Edward Vartanyan was getting paid so much by ACA. And then Paul Hughes, and then, of course, you've got Saladin Parnasse, who I think makes like $600,000-$700,000 a fight, fighting for KSW, without sponsorship bonuses as well. So, like, the UFC's never going to get Paul Hughes, because I think PFL is just going to keep paying him money. Anyways, why did I get on so much of a tangent? I think Usman Nurmagomedov in this matchup is going to wrestle more than he did in the last fight. I know he did wrestle a lot, but he was probably getting quite complacent, because if you do watch his fight against Shabalai, he didn't really wrestle offensively against Shabalai. That was a lot of situation with Shabalai wrestling him, and then Usman was defending the takedowns from there, and he was just kind of outstriking him. He did beat Brent Primus, but, there's a lot of different stories about this. The Nurmagomedov fans will say it's something that, some people will say it's not, but, this isn't the first situation on camp. Islam Makkashev's got one of these as well, by the way, but anyways, I do think that Usman Nurmagomedov is going to win this matchup. I think he's going to win by decision. I will actually just apologize. I think that's not a good breakdown, guys. I'm sorry for that one fight, which a lot of people are very excited about. Listen, if you think that Paul Hughes wins in your gut, back Paul Hughes, man. Like if you really want my opinion, my personal opinion is I think Usman wins again. But if in your gut you think Paul Hughes wins, back yourself, man, because that's a good pick. That's a plus 250 underdog that has a real chance of winning the fight. So, yeah, that's it for this fight. I think it's a really great fight. I think it's a really great card. Once again, as I said in the intro, if you haven't given the PFL an opportunity, I would recommend you give them an opportunity now, because they're changing. And I think they're changing for the better.